So, reincarnation is one of those beliefs that doesn't go away, or maybe I should say one of those ideas that doesn't go away. There's every now and again somebody has the bright idea of doing a survey about how many people believe in reincarnation, and as with always with surveys, it depends a bit on the question you ask and so on, but it always comes in somewhere between 20 and 30%. Which is quite surprising because there are two very powerful reasons not to think that reincarnation is possible, or that even the thought of it is permissible. And one of those reasons, obviously, is the prevailing secular, humanist, scientific mindset, with its roots, well, going far, far back, but most recently perhaps renewed through Darwin and the whole evolutionary theory, and the picture of the mind, let alone anything like the self or some kind of eternal core or soul, as being what's politely called an emergent property, and what in one wonderful book title is called The Necessary Illusion. So it's important for human beings, according to some evolutionary biologists, to have the illusion that they are in some way souls inhabiting bodies, but it is just an illusion. And I think normally with this theory, it almost goes hand in hand, the thought that once you've seen that it's a necessary illusion, obviously you don't need to have it anymore, you've transcended it, and you can cheerfully sort of go face to face with the reality that we are nothing other than the product of our brain cells and complicated interactions between neurons and so on and so on. So the prevailing culture has a picture of the human being which doesn't even allow us to start thinking, well, what happens to the soul after death? Or where did the soul come from before birth? Both of which obviously are important questions which reincarnation, the idea of reincarnation, tries to answer. Because there is no such thing as the soul or a self, not even within this lifetime, let alone coming from some faraway realm and persisting beyond the end of the brain function. I am my brain, I am the functions of my nervous system, and anything else is, well, the necessary illusion. So that's the one side, where you could think, well, given that an awful lot of people hold that to be true, where are these 20% that believe in reincarnation? The other side is perhaps equally, or was at least equally strong, or maybe even stronger than our current scientific mindset, and that comes from an attitude which became really important in the early centuries of Christian history. So Christianity obviously was born in a world where for many people, the idea of something like reincarnation, because of course reincarnation comes in many different flavors, many different varieties, but the idea of something like reincarnation, certainly the idea of a pre-existing soul, and of the soul being on a journey that went on after death, and had some kind of continuing development. This was part of the wider historic and cultural context into which the church was born. And in the early centuries, the very earliest centuries of the church, there was a great marriage of Christian ideas, Jewish ideas, the ideas of the Neoplatonists, the philosophers of the day, that gave rise to spiritual movements that are usually grouped together under the title of Gnosticism. So there was a great kind of melting pot, and in all of that there were some of the most amazing, beautiful visions of the soul's journey. And there was a moment when it became really important for the church, probably for very, very good world historic reasons, to really restrict the gaze to this lifetime and to the uniqueness and the special opportunity that this particular lifetime that we were in offered to us, and the once and for all character of the decisions that we made in this lifetime, often summed up under the heading of the Day of Judgment and the idea of a final judgment that will come based on what we've done here and now in this lifetime. And so the last traces of that amazing kind of what you would call a sort of syncretistic, so a kind of synthesizing spiritual vision, which was very much part of the early, certain parts of the early church, was needed to be shut out, and by the 4th century and certainly into the 5th and 6th centuries, it was made absolutely clear we have to think about this lifetime, we have to think about the sense in which we come into this lifetime and we are unique, we've never existed before, and at the end of this lifetime, this particular earthly existence will come to an end, and we'll have to wait for something new to happen before, well, we will be assessed on what we've done, maybe even judged, and whatever fate awaits us will depend entirely on what we've done in this lifetime. And we can see that, perhaps, in a way, if you have a sort of evolutionary perspective of an evolution of consciousness, we can see that as a really necessary and important stage, also in the development of the feeling of being a free individual. And you get something of that, you sort of see in a way why that medicine was needed, the medicine of turning so exclusively to this lifetime, when you meet friends who maybe are a little bit involved in the New Age movement and who've picked up a kind of generalized idea of many lifetimes, and sometimes even people in the anthroposophical movement inspired by Rudolf Steiner, which the Christian community has also got a connection with. You sometimes meet people saying things like, well, this is a terrible problem, and my goodness, we can't seem to sort it out. It's all right. We'll sort it out next life. It's really okay, because we'll have many lifetimes to sort it out in. And I think that's, in a way, a kind of regression. It's going back to an old way of thinking about karma and reincarnation. Maybe it's not even a particularly thoroughgoing way of thinking about it at all, but it's a sort of feeling. And in that you see how, if we take the idea of reincarnation in one way, it becomes an invitation to almost to evade responsibility and not to take on the moral tasks that I have as an individual in this life. And I think that's one of the ways that one can really see why it probably was really important for humanity to shut out this thought of coming from a spiritual world with many lifetimes before and going to carry on into a spiritual world with maybe many lifetimes to come, and just to concentrate on this lifetime. Now, the title of this evening's talk and discussion, presentations and discussion, is Christianity and Reincarnation. And if you do a bit of research on this topic, you'll find lots of websites and books, some of them arguing very persuasively that Christianity and reincarnation can have nothing at all to do with each other, and some of them arguing that actually they're compatible and in a way, maybe even the ideas of reincarnation are hidden in the New Testament, waiting to be found. I think it probably is fairest to say that the Bible, there are a few things that it says in the Bible that seem to speak for the uniqueness of this life, very much in the way I've just described. And there are a few things in the Bible that seem to speak for this life being part of a chain of lives. But as with so many things, if one really reflects on one's own, how my own journey was, there are many, many things which I believe that I find in the Bible But if I'm really honest, I have to confess, I had them as a question before I read the particular passage in the Bible. And when I read it, I found confirmation for my question. I found a positive answer. And I think that in terms of reincarnation, if you have the question, could it be that we have many earth lives, then you'll read particularly perhaps the question around the identity of John the Baptist and whether he's Elijah come again. And you'll say, look, you see, that means that the Old Testament is teaching reincarnation. But you might, if you really reflect on your own process, you might notice, actually, you had the question first, and then you noticed it in the New Testament. Or the question about the man born blind, and whether he sinned or his parents sinned. Does that mean that the disciples knew that there's such a thing as a past life in which he could have sinned? Because they say that he sinned so that he was born blind. So this sin obviously lies before he was born. But again, if you didn't have the question about reincarnation in Kana, you probably wouldn't see the question as proof of it. And then you might attend more to the fact that John the Baptist himself denies that he's Elijah returned, and Jesus, in relation to the man born blind, dismisses the idea that it was either his parents' sin or his own sin, and says instead that the illness is for the glory of God. So my suggestion is that the New Testament doesn't give us a grounding in what would be called theological anthropology. It doesn't set out in systematic terms how we're supposed to think about the human being and his spiritual makeup, his or her spiritual makeup, but rather it gives us lots of material which we will tend to meditate on and work with according to the framework that we bring to it. So I think any attempt to answer the question about Christianity and reincarnation with a sort of battle of Bible quotes is probably doomed to futility. The deeper question is, what is Christianity really about? And can the ideas of Christianity and the essence and the life of Christianity be compatible with something like reincarnation? And there too, we see that there are great shifting frameworks and, in a way, paradigms within which people have seen Christianity. So again, in the earliest centuries, you have somebody like Irenaeus, one of the early church fathers, and he had a very developmental picture of Christianity, and a very developmental picture of what it means to be human, and what the earth is. He said the earth is a veil of soul-making. We come to the earth, we experience ourselves cut off from the spiritual world, we suffer, we go through all sorts of difficult things, and all of this is to help us to become truly human. And Christ is the great helper. He's the one who shows us the way, and makes it possible for us to make those steps on our journey. And then you could say, well, something like reincarnation, which is at its heart a picture of an ongoing development of human beings, somewhere could fit into that framework. But in that time which I've described, in the 4th, and 5th, and 6th centuries, when the gaze needed to be fixed so clearly on this one earthly life, then that kind of developmental picture, certainly in the Western Church, passed out of fashion, one could say. And that it became replaced by something that you could describe more as a static picture. And in the classic theology that you find in Augustine, you even get this idea of we were created in a state of grace, and through the fall of man we passed into a state of sin, and only through Christ's saving deed and the church can we be put back into a state of grace again. So quite literally, even in the vocabulary, a static picture. We're either there or we're here, and we have to get back again. And I think if we try to think about what's the human experience in the 20th century, and 21st century, we experience ourselves as creatures who are becoming. In a way, that's the great gift of Darwin and the whole idea of evolution. But maybe we need to discover an even more radical vision of that evolution, that evolution doesn't just stop when it delivers the human being at the end of a great ladder of becoming, but actually as human beings we also experience with ourselves that we're also constantly becoming. And maybe along with the idea that we're becoming, that we're developing, that's in the core of what it means to be human. We also have the idea, now more and more in our time, that we are co-creators, that we're co-authors of our experience of reality, and indeed of reality itself. And I think that's where the new ideas about reincarnation that were brought into the world by the Austrian philosopher and universal learned person, Rudolf Steiner, have a particular relevance because they speak to human beings in their nature as ceaselessly becoming and also co-creating their experience of reality. And I want to just home in on one area there before I pass over to Monika. And that's the idea of karma. Because of course reincarnation is normally part of a sort of pair of concepts, and the other concept being karma. So the idea of a law according to which we will experience things in this lifetime. So we did something in our last lifetime, and that means we have to pay a kind of compensation. That's one of the places where some Christian theologians look at that and say, well, how does that fit with the idea of grace and forgiveness? And that's something we could talk about in the conversation. But now just to take this idea of karma as an iron law, and to bring a new nuance to that, which Rudolf Steiner, through his spiritual researches, describes for us. And these are ideas which, in a way, we can't take on faith. We can't just say, oh, well, Rudolf Steiner said it, so it must be interesting and believable. But they're ideas that we can try out and see whether they help us to make sense of our experience of reality. And if they help us, then we might work with them further and come to our own conclusions. So for Steiner, the soul's journey after death was not a process of being confronted with a sort of record of all the bad things that we've done and being shown all the dreadful things that were going to happen to you afterwards, or perhaps occasionally one or two good things as well, that were going to befall you in your next life. But rather, the soul's journey after death was an experience of peeling away, layer by layer, the limitations on the horizon, the sort of limited radii of our consciousness, which, like the skin of an onion, in a way sort of surround us and make us only able to focus on what's right in front of us in the here and now. And stage by stage, our consciousness becomes more encompassing, according to Rudolf Steiner, until we can see ourselves utterly truthfully. No hiding away from the awkward bits, or not choosing to dwell on those bits of ourselves, which is, if we're honest, I think, with all our efforts in self-knowledge, we do tend, depending a bit on your character and constitution, of course, we tend to stress the positives a little bit more than the places where we still need to learn. But, so it's a process of coming to a complete understanding of what we are and what we've done. And out of that understanding, an incredible desire awakens. A desire for experiences and opportunities to learn the lesson that we might not have managed to learn in the lifetime gone by. So that karma, according to Rudolf Steiner, is not some awful law, like the finger of God pushing us here and there and telling us what dreadful things we need to suffer. Rather, karma is my decision. And it's true, of course, that it belongs to the particular quality of this decision that I'm not allowed to remember making it. Because because if I did, I suppose everything would be too easy. But this is a liberating idea to live with, at least. We know this. If we have a row with a co-worker, it's always a good idea to think back and reflect and try and work out, even if I'm completely convinced that right is on my side, to let's say 95%, it's quite interesting to attend to the 5% where I can acknowledge, maybe you do have something where, I have something to do with this situation. It is at least partly my co-creation. And if we can imagine thinking that not just about things that happen from this day to the next, but in the whole of our lifetime, the question then would be, does this help us in our experience of humanity in the 21st century as beings where what we experience is, with all of our limitations and problems, we nevertheless ceaselessly have this desire and also this capacity to evolve and to change, to learn and to grow, and to take ownership of the things that we experience and feel that we are co-creators of our destiny. So this is a particular nuance which Rudolf Steiner brings into the whole idea of the law of karma. Not so much law, but my decision, and identifying with that decision gives me the chance of becoming at one, at least for moments, with that part of myself which, this would be the hypothesis, existed in a time before birth and could make that decision, and will continue to exist and make new decisions with the consequences of what I do in this lifetime.